Movies good. Me like movies. Here's some movies. Yay! I don't know why I'm doing jazz hands. So I think it's time I explain my criteria for what is a movie of the year. So like what is a 2022 release? Because you're going to see some movies from like 2021 and I think even a couple of years back. I think there's one from like 2019. And you're probably wondering, oh, why is this movie on here when it didn't come out, released that year? So here is my explanation. I suffer from a terrible affliction called living in Ireland. So we don't tend to get the great release schedule that you Brits or you Yanks tend to have. Actually, the UK kind of has a terrible schedule as well because we tend to get the same distributor, so mostly just from the US. So my criteria in this regard is from the release year hybrids. My criteria is it has to be legally released in the calendar year within the Republic of Ireland and can be legally viewed. That includes Region 2 and Region B2 DVDs or Blu-rays, obviously in a cinema, any cinema screening, whatever, as long as it's publicly available, as in you can buy a ticket and you can go to it, that counts for my thing. Any streaming service of the 10 billion ones that's released here, any digital downloads, like any kind of capacity, as long as you can watch it, you can pay for it, you can watch it in Ireland within 2022 and it hadn't been released beforehand, that's where I count it, right? I have a cutoff date. It's 10 years after the release, and I tend to go by IMDb, even if that's not the most reliable thing. If IMDb says it was in this year, I won't count. So it's like from 2013. I do not count any movie from that year anymore backwards as a 2023 release, for example. Like, I don't think I've ever gotten to like counting a movie from 10 years ago. I think the closest was Songs My Brothers Taught Me, which was released in 2015. I put on my 2021 list because it was released on Mubi on that year after the success of Chloe Zhao's other films like Nomadland and Eternals was coming out. Actually, something similar happened to Cathy Yan, the director of Birds of Prey. Her movie Dead Pigs came out the year after that on Mubi. Mubi's actually a pretty good resource if you can like afford its extortionate fucking subscription fee, which I hope that proves that they're not sponsoring me. I don't know why they'd sponsor someone with like less than 100 subscribers, but just in case you thought that. Is this criteria perfect? Of course not. Like, I mean, I'm going to make mistakes. It's human error. Does the term legal really apply? Because you could technically just buy a Region A DVD player or Region A1 Blu-ray player, and it's perfectly legal for you to play the region-locked DVDs or Blu-rays on that player. It's a lot of effort to do it, but yes, you can technically legally watch a Region A Blu-ray or DVD or whatever on here that's region-locked sort of things, but as long as regions are a thing, I will abide by them. Nailed it. I mean, I'm going to make mistakes. If you want to dispute any of this, I have the watch list of 2022 listed in my blog on a link below in the description. And nobody has ever come to me to dispute any of the films I put onto these lists. I wonder why. And if you wonder why I go into that much effort to do this, think of it like, I mean, if I stuck more strictly 2022 releases in Ireland, I'd be stuck with way more mainstream releases, which is a lot of films that I love that I wouldn't be able to really talk about on these lists, or I'd have to push it back a few months. Like, for example, Tar, Pearl, and Fablemans haven't come out in Ireland yet, and they're 2022 movies technically, so I wouldn't have counted them for future talking about them in the future, which is a shame because those I'm looking forward to seeing those movies, and those were just off the top of my head. So that's why I do this. Now that I'm sure none of you care about any of that preamble, let's move on to the list.
Why are you pulling on me?
So a lot of people say that like the modern day Buster Keaton is Tom Cruise, and they are wrong. Jackass are the modern Buster Keaton. Fuck anyone who says otherwise. A fourth Jackass movie, especially like I think over a decade after the last one came out, I don't think anyone was really expecting this, aside the fact that legacy sequels are the big thing right now. And there's kind of a bittersweet tone to this because for various reasons, the original lineup are just not here anymore. And you could definitely feel her age. Like there's a famous story, the fact that one of the stunts in the movie caused Johnny Knoxville to be hospitalized for a very long time because I think it's dude's like in his 50s. So like, yeah, they can't be doing this forever. And they actually bring new cast members in for the first time ever into this film. And I think they bring a good dynamic. They're a lot of fun. They're really energetic. They really bring a lot to the proceedings. And like, I'm not saying there's not going to be a fifth movie with these guys, but there's a sense of this is a last rodeo, that like these guys can't keep doing this forever and escaping death, cheating death more or less. So the stunts seem to have a bit more of a pizzazz to them. There seems to be a bit more of a push to make this as extreme as possible. Well, not extreme as possible, but, you know, just to bring more of a spectacle there, and, you know, putting all these stunts together and having the laugh and everything, you know, to bring that sense of camaraderie full circle. So, and there was a lot of these kind of bro-y stunt shows from like the late 90s or 2000s. Again, you know, they were popularized by Jackass. They were inspired by Jackass to try to catch in on them. But what always made Jackass stand out is the sense of camaraderie between the cast members, that they all seemed like they're friends doing dumb shit together. And that made that kind of, you know, joy de vivre to watching this way stick out, because you liked these guys and you really enjoyed getting in on this action. And I think this film really kind of exemplifies that that kind of twilight of moving on with their careers. And, well, I mean, their lives, because they will eventually kill themselves if they keep doing this into their 70s. And I feel like this movie gets that across extremely effectively. It's a hell of a lot of fun, and again, that's what these movies tend to just strive towards, and I think this does it really effectively. It's one of the best, I guess, documentaries, if you can call it that, of the year.
Oh, no.
How you doing there, big guy?
I don't know. I mean, I held it together in front of the kids during dinner, but I'm really worried.
Oh, yeah? I couldn't tell.
This definitely isn't one I'm sure you'd be really into unless you were a fan of Bob's Burgers before going to show. I don't think it's something that will, like, change your mind on the series if you haven't seen it already. It's kind of similar to the Simpsons movie in that regard. Movies based on TV shows this directly, they tend to be kind of inaccessible in their own way if you haven't watched the series. And also, sometimes it just feel like an extended kind of episode of the TV show. Funny enough, I started talking about Jackass, and those films are basically, that was the approach they took. They said, this is just the TV show, but on a big budget. Probably one of the better examples of this is like Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. And not only because like Lynch was a very accomplished filmmaker before he went for the TV show, and kind of going off on a tangent, Bob's Burgers is a comfort show for me. So having it kind of expand like this, and having way kind of better animation and way more fluid and way more engaging, and a lot of things that makes it stand out is that they made it a musical. Kind of. There's only like 2 or 3 songs in fairness, but they're really well done. And I mean, music's been used in the show as well, but I think it's incorporated way more interestingly like this, and it's got more of a Broadway feel than when the songs are used on the TV show. And again, maybe that's all you can get out of this, that it's just a larger expansion of the show, but I think that's what makes it so great. It's got a great kind of laid back tone. The plot is very comedically exploitable and tends to use the characters in a really clever way, and it's just fun to have an expanded kind of feel of like hanging out with these characters, including Super Mario herself.
Mushroom Kingdom, here we come.
So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think this movie kind of breaks the mold of these TV show adaptations, but I guess that's why it's so low on this list. At the same time, if you love the show, you'll probably really enjoy the movie, which I did. So yeah, it's really great, and I would highly recommend it. It's just a lot of fun to see these guys on the big screen. It's also great to see the voice cast, to see these kind of big, like, fuck off credits to their names, because that rarely happens for professional voice actors, because it's usually celebrities that get stuff like that. So that's really cool.
Que no te truenes los dedos, Valeria. Vas a quedar chueca.
So this is a horror film that's based in Mexico, and it's one of the most psychologically grueling things I've sat through all year. What makes it stand out is that there's a great sense of that this film is essentially about heteronormativity. That the horror in it is this woman feeling like she has to confine herself into these social roles to fit in with her very conservative Christian family. And like, she's married to this guy and she's trying to have a baby with him, and she's kind of showing the enthusiasm, but in the back of her mind there's something really wrong with where she's pushing her life towards, and that's where a lot of the horror elements kind of feed off. And without going into too much spoilers, her being in this very cis-het marriage may not be what she needs and desires, which causes a rift when she goes through with this stuff midway through the film. And it's great because on top of the wonderful framing and imagery, The sound design is really great on this film, and the acting is fantastic, especially from our lead. What really makes what I like about it is that it doesn't try to make her too sympathetic. That at some point her reticence to push what she needs is more of a flaw that gets more and more apparent as it goes on. And, there's only so many excuses you can give. At the same time, there are a lot of people on the outskirts of society that do not conform to this again, there's a lot of religious-based imagery in this film, but they don't conform to this heteronormative, religiously enveloped society, with the character being very fully three-dimensional, which I think a lot of people can relate to. It's something I recommend to a lot of people in that kind of struggles. And but like anyone in general, it's not very overt with the imagery and the metaphor and the themes that I am extrapolating from it. It's just a very great horror film with a very, very disturbing undercurrent. There's something great about animation that kind of captures a mood in a way that doesn't have to be coherent, but has a very emotionally consistent through line. And I feel like this one does that very well. It's essentially a reimagining of Robinson Crusoe in contemporary times. So you get that sense of the themes of the novel being extrapolated to kind of examine capitalism, late stage capitalism, border crises, the sense of identity through consumerism, and the kind of corrosive effects that it has. There's a lot going on here, but the film has a very kind of interesting, different rhythm to it. Like the dialogue, it doesn't feel like these characters speak in a very natural way, but you get a sense of what they're trying to get across. And this works towards creating a different atmosphere that feels very emotionally true. Characters are a lot of fun, they're very quirky and interesting, so it's something that I really got a kick out of, and I'm hoping more people see it. I just happened to catch it at a film festival. I'm hoping it gets a broader release as we go on. It's an extremely underrated film, and it's really, really enjoyable. Try to catch it if you can. Another one with a distinctive style and even, again, very distinctive dialogue to get across a different mood, but also being very kind of communicative and in a way that, people can broadly understand. This film is set in Burundi. It's this dystopic future with this imperialist regime trying to plunder the natural resources, and a bunch of revolutionaries in the form of hacking are trying to push back against that. It's very prevalent for the land it's set in, and also it's a musical made by an American composer who basically, it was essentially like a concept album that kind of developed into a movie, and the songs slap. It's got a great sound design, and it also explores gender in a really fascinating way. The idea of how future technology can envelop our kind of cultural understanding of ourselves, and how it affects our relationship with our bodies and with the broader sense of community in a bigger context. It's beautiful cinematography. It's one of the best looking films I've seen all year, and it's just so creatively distinctive. And it's a story about our never ending quest to get as much resource out of this world as possible, no matter who we hurt in our exploitation, and queer radicals that will push up against it and kind of guide us towards our future. It's really inspiring in that way.
Okay, somebody else has to go and get the drinks. What are we looking at?
Aaron found that guy's Instagram.
Okay, that's frightening. I hope he's cool though, because his friend turned out to be kind of a dud.
This is another one of the more accessible films on my list, but it's got such a distinctive voice that I couldn't help but be incredibly charmed by it. I love that it's basically just a modern day adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, but it's set on a gay hookup resort island, and most of the cast are men, and it's about their relationships and their dynamics. It's a really great exploration of gay culture in a way that feels very contemporary and feels very honest, and it's rather snarky in a way. It's just a really funny movie. I think it's one of the funnier movies I've seen all year. It's one of the big reasons why I got on this list. It's got such an emotional truism that really resonated with me, especially queer people in their 30s who feel like they haven't really found a way, and it can be difficult with those dynamics where you don't fit into the cis-het norm. You feel like the clock is ticking ever slower, so the Pride and Prejudice stuff fits into that mold set of kind of more of a traditionalist framework to tell a very modern story. Honestly, the biggest thing that stands out about it is just a very well told romantic comedy drama with gay men in the front seat. So, you know, color me impressed and extremely entertained.
But staying awake for more than 4 days and nights can be dangerous.
Hvad bedst for ham at spise?
Ginseng.
This one looks at a bunch of arcade nerds, and we see them kind of at the precipice of this kind of passion because arcade systems aren't really made anymore. And it follows this one guy in particular as he tries to beat the high score for playing Gyrus as long as possible, which is like roughly 100 hours. Especially as somebody who makes these videos purely for my own entertainment, I don't really plan or desire to make any money out of this. I like people who just follow their passions, put so much effort into it when there's no real financial benefit. It's just the love of the game, and pun intended, I guess. And stuff like this brings up the fact that this is obsolete. Like, there's some cafes that they go to that still hold these machines, but they're fewer and far between, and it's very much a novelty thing. It's not just that, it goes into their personal lives and the surprisingly physical aspects of being somebody who follows this hobby, especially as a lot of these men are in their 50s or their 60s and they have grandchildren and stuff. You know, they're not getting any younger, so I like that aspect of it. And, you know, people kind of ponder about what they've done with their lives and the stock they have in kind of this stuff and where it developed to. It's a very naturalistic but incredibly endearing and heartfelt documentary about what it's like to follow your passions in this kind of odd, strange little thing of playing arcade games, which, you know, arcade games rocks, so that's very relatable.
Là-bas. Et vous, pas des rêves de voyage?
Je suis en train de travailler sur un projet de fusée. J'espère un jour envoyer le premier Libanais dans l'espace.
One thing I've always bothered me about war films is that they tend to go big into totality of loss, of how this affects people on a mass kind of scale, especially on the battlefront. While it obviously isn't a wordless perspective to look into, I think it's a lot more resonant when we see the day-to-day and the family lives that get ruined by these conflicts. It's more than likely going to affect you indirectly than you being involved in this fight, and this is what this movie really definitely explores in its own distinctive way. I like that it's got this very colourful aesthetic that doesn't really feel like it's hitting tonality against the kind of awe-inspiring danger that these characters are constantly in at this moment, held by these really cool stop motion sequences that really blend into the narrative really effectively. Overall, it wants to give you this sense of hopelessness and a loss of identity that war causes, especially the way it can break families apart, and that's something sadly we should consider in our increasingly tumultuous times. I really love finding queer films that tend to explore it in a way that's confrontational, that you wouldn't really consider or think about. And this film is great as the bulk of it is these two women reuniting after they had a thing in Soviet-occupied Georgia where one of them left, but the other one settled and had a family, and they're meeting together and kind of, combining their life experiences as they try to resonate. There's this great unspoken tension throughout the entire thing, and it really examines what was lost in this mass homophobia and the fact that even though it's obviously gotten better as time has gone on, it doesn't feel like much has changed, especially for these two women in particular. It's a very interesting and fascinating dynamic and conversation. It's beautifully shot, especially with the fact there's not a lot of different kind of changing scenarios or movement until the final act. I like the fact that I never get tired of watching this because the visual element of it is so striking. Speaking of, there's this sci-fi kind of twist it takes in the end of the third act, And this is probably going to turn a lot of people off it because it is so jarring compared to how quiet and slow and contemplative the first two acts are. Personally, I think it works for what it's trying to get across. It's a movie about exploring the past, that's how it reflects the present. So showing how this might affect the future. I really appreciate that it's willing to just completely break genre to explore the themes it wants to get across. It's such a daring and evocative movie, and I really hope more people discover it. One hand on his wily comet.
Please, can I play?
What part of dead don't you understand, Schmendrick?
It's boring in there. I hate being dead.
Uh-oh, now you did it.
What's that?
Processing. Go see the boss, kid.
There were like 4 or 5 different Pinocchio movies that came out. Not even this year. I think it was like 3, but like last couple of years, we've going through a kind of Pinocchio. I'm not going to try to make a fucking stupid word of Pinocchio and Renaissance. While I have a lot of love for the much forgotten about Matteo Garrone Pinocchio, if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's really good. It's way more accurate to the book as well. This one is probably one of the better ones you're going to see, and that's because it comes from the imagination and passion of Guillermo del Toro. One of the things I love about his work is that he tends to get this perspective of the monster as an outsider, and he has such endearing empathy for that presence, for that being. And it really shows in so much of his work, and the most obvious one is The Shape of Water, but even the Hellboy series has that. Here we get a sense of somebody being very innocent, being pushed into a fascist society, and it really examines who are our true selves and what do we truly want, and who do we truly want to trust and to be when these various social factors and emotional baggage from being in such a horrible conflict are lifted, and we have this naivete that's basically reflecting what these characters need, especially with Geppetto, who David Bradley does an amazing job here, and his character is very, very much can come across as very unlikable in a lot of places, but that's what makes him so interesting, and that's what makes his growth so compelling. And again, fascism is something he's explored before in various different facets. Obviously Pan's Labyrinth is the best example, but here we get a sense of how creative and kooky he is as well, where we get that cool thing where the fairy that gives him his life and the kind of Grim Reaper sort of death presence, both played by Tilda Swinton. Regardless of all the thematic stuff I'm mentioning, and people seem to be really gravitating towards that, especially because the very blunt and unapologetic anti-fascism in this, and everyone remembers the song that Pinocchio sings, and it's funny, and it's very much like what a kid would say, but also it's evocative of like how fake and presumptuous and boisterous fascistic leanings is. It's just a very endearing story of life and loss, and what we can do when we allow ourselves to connect to something more real and authentic, and not let the hurt, which can be very difficult, and the fear boil us down in that way. And it's just a cute, quirky Pinocchio adventure with such a distinctive voice and vision. It really helps connect in a more kind of contemporary context. And again, as much as I love the Garrone film, that's way too kind of murk in the past. This one feels like it's a Pinocchio for the modern day, and I really appreciate that. Plus the puppet is just really adorable. This is one of the best films about bullying I've ever seen, and that's not a topic that tends to get focused on in a rather honest way, because we tend to just experience it from adults looking in. But this one is from the perspective of a child, not even a bullied child, the sister of the kid who's being bullied, and her reaction to it and how isolated it makes her feel. One of the great things about this is that the movie never gravitates away from that classroom, because kids spend so much time in school that when something like this conflict happens and it can affect them in the way that it does in this film, it's very true to life. They tend to not want to be open about it because it affects such a large portion of their lives. They spend a third of their weekdays in these buildings. It's such a huge part of who they are, that to have that disrupted feels like the world is falling apart. It truly doesn't pull any punches, and it's so honest. And the child actors are great. You really buy their bond as brother and sister, and that really makes the conflict that goes on extremely murky and even hard to watch, because you just want what's best for them. But that's not really how these kind of societal aspects play out in terms of how these kids will end up kind of coming out on the other end. It really shows how these kind of, you know, experiences resonate as time goes on, even though this movie only takes place within a couple of days. You see how fast that children gravitate towards different things, and you see that in its very careful cinematography in terms of how it really isolates the viewer with this poor kid as she's going through something insanely anxiety inducing at a very young age, and it never feels like it's condescending or talking down to her or giving really stupid, fake, insincere lessons about bullying. It just lets the experience play out, and we should draw our own conclusions in terms of what is the best foot forward in these scenarios. I talked about people following their passions with cannon arms, and this one is also the same, except this one is a profession. And it's also a love story of these two people who found each other through their love of volcanoes, and they spend a lot of their lives. This movie compiles about, I think, 30 years of footage going near active volcanoes to study them. Because the tapes only run until the 90s, it's a lot of VHS stuff, and I love that kind of quality. I love the kind of the downgraded experience of watching this. It's some of my favorite documentary filmmaking whenever this kind of pops up. But I just really, you really grow endearing to these two people and their relationship and how they bond together and their very distinctive personalities that you really follow and you really grow to like. And I love the fact that it shows them not working at the volcanoes, and you see how frustrating it is for them to do paperwork and their kind of busy day stuff that they just want to get out there and explore. It's really showing the effects of both them following their passions and the force of good that this happened. I won't say much about the movie, but you know, these two actually did a lot in terms of our understanding of volcanic eruptions. It's so emotionally resonant, and again, I apologize for the pun, fiery in its passion. It's just one of the most well constructed, interesting documentaries I've seen all year. Very few films get to that stage where they compel me so much that I rewatch them almost immediately after I've seen them. I had a similar experience with I Was at Home But, which also got into number 12 of my last list, funnily enough. And yeah, this one I was like, I need to understand what the dynamics are here. And I don't know if I completely get what this film is going for, but it compels me. It's that unspoken tension between these two roommates as one of them is moving out and the other one seems nonplussed about this is the best way to describe it. And like, there's this real undercurrent that there's something really wrong with what's happening here and where these two were. And it's a great look at the fear of not the macro so much of the move, but like the small things, like the fact that they go out for smoking breaks, or just having the moment the spider is that the spider's crawling on their hands and they just both look at it really fascinatingly, which is not really a reaction you expect when a spider's crawling up somebody, but it's how these two connect, or how they did connect. There's a pain here, and in a way these characters interact that's really subtle and just also incredibly disturbing and off-putting in a really good way. Again, the sound design is what really makes this film. It really gets under your skin, but there's nothing really actually going on. There's one or two very strange moments that are off-putting, but it doesn't try to spell this out, is what I'm saying. If you like those films that are a bit more explorative in a way that doesn't try to spell it out precisely, but and I hate using this term, it's the only one that comes to mind, in an avant-garde sort of way, where it's doing something in this kind of experimental way, but there's a lot of purpose behind the narrative that's being told here. Definitely want to check out. It's like we're at the edge of a violent episode, incrementally detailed and fascinating character study.
La vie est un rêve, non?
Oui. La vie est un rêve dans un rêve.
I really want to make a joke here where our enfant terrible, Gaspar Noé, made something way more terrifying than anything else he's done, just making an ordinary story. But no, growing old sucks ass, and it's something we don't tend to want to look into, and it's interesting that, you know, he does in such a beautifully powerful way. It's one of the more emotionally cathartic of his movies. There's the split camera technique, which he had used in the film previously, but here it kind of shows how intricately involved these two people's lives are, and when you share a space with somebody for that long, what happens when that comes to an end, that gets to a point where, you know, both of them are on the precipice of dying. One of them has severe dementia, the other one has really bad heart issues. So what happens when these two people who are inseparable near the end of their lives? And it's so devastating and just so, you know, emotional in a way that very few films that explore the topic of death get to, because of the context of this being about a couple. You know, a couple who are both essentially about to die soon. It's definitely one that I feel like it plays off the expectations of Noé as a filmmaker, and it's just excellently acted. I didn't realize that Dario Argento could act. He's great in this. It really captures that frustration and weight of getting old and having more to do and having more you want to explore, but your body just cannot get there. It's strangely life-affirming in a way if you don't end up just staring at a wall for 4 hours once you've finished. This movie set in a small village in Guerrero, where the girls are given really short haircuts to look like boys, so they're not picked up by human traffickers and brought into that line after things go to disarray after Civil War. As you can tell, it's a very, very fun movie. It's one that really looks into, you know, the kind of growing childhood of these situations, where we're at the perspective of a young girl as she explores coming of age in these times and wanting to kind of make something of her life as she begins to, you know, grow and develop. But it's in the backdrop of this incredibly oppressive and terrifying war. Like, it's great because the conflict with the mother, it comes across as unreasonable because we're on her perspective, but at the same time, she's a mother who's trying to protect her daughter from these horrific acts of, if she's found out that she is a girl who's coming of age, that will end badly, so badly for her. The final 20-30 minutes of this it's some of the best filmmaking I've seen all year, and it's just some of the most heartbreaking and fraught and just depressing. Again, not going to spoil it for you. You can probably kind of figure out what happens going by my tone and my description of the film, but at the same time, I don't think oxygen left my body when I first saw it. It's excellent filmmaking. It's important filmmaking. And it's really, I don't know if it's one that you kind of want to turn on a Saturday night to relax filmmaking, but it's absolutely, please track this one down. It's so good and it's so harsh.
Made her myself. No electricity.
Didn't I tell you this motherfucker was gonna come up here with a non-electrical camera? Let's go, boy!
Jordan Peele's films tend to look at how black bodies are exploited in culture, and he does this in very fascinating and nuanced ways that make his films so endlessly rewatchable. This one interweaves this with animal exploitation in Hollywood and seeds grounds to compassion and, you know, the rejection of self-centered obsessions to rise to the top. It's bold, weird, intricately plotted, one of the best scores I've heard all year, and probably my favourite of Peele's films so far. And we're getting to the part of the list where I think there's more films that people probably have seen and talked about that are going to be propped up, so I don't really have a lot that I can add here that hasn't already been talked about. It's one of those things where his pristine social commentary is integrated into a film that's just a lot of fun and has probably two of the best performances of the year with Danny Kaluuya and Keke Palmer. I love their characters and I love their dynamic together, and they just both steal the show in ways that like really makes me want to check out the rest of their careers as long as they keep going, because they're so good here. They're so good.
Но потом на Гранд-форуме я встретила Кими.
This is easily my favorite documentary of the year. It explores the relationship between two teenagers as they grow into adulthood, and it's expanded over the time of 2006, I think roughly around, starts to like now, especially because they're around my age. I definitely related to kind of growing up as a teenager and a young adult in this time period. I love because it's more of a video diary. It's just this couple filming themselves as time goes on, and we get to see like the advancements of technology and like different cameras they started using to film this stuff. And because it's set in Russia, you know, Putin's Russia was like in full swing around this time. I think it was maybe around the time that he wasn't president. And again, I'd need to look up my more recent Russian history. My point is, it's a very important piece of kind of Russian history, modern Russian history, and seeing these people grow up in real time is especially relevant considering everything that happened with Russia and in 2022, that to have empathy for the people there, not the government, because fuck the Kremlin. It's important to understand that. Decoupling it from this, it's one of the best explorations of my generation and growing up in this time and feeling that sense of directionlessness and loss and the inability to really find a way to truly, you know, connect in a way that our parents did and stabilize ourselves through that. As you can tell from the title, there's thoughts of ending your life really throughout this. It's emotional, it's resonant, it's so heartbreaking, and it has probably my favorite final line of the year. It fucking broke me, man. It's so compelling, and it's such great work.
This is for serious players only. I hope that you're ready to get scared together.
So this one was directed by a prominent Twitter head, and it has a cameo from a pretty successful YouTuber who I happen to be mutuals with. Now, we don't interact like at all. We just happen to follow each other. Because like I followed her work for years and she just happened to follow me back. And I just got a kick because I didn't know she was in the film. I got a kick of seeing her. I was like, hey, I know you. I follow you. And if you're wondering why I'm going into the story, my point is we have a very strange relationship with the internet that we should explore more, like the way this film does. I like the way it takes these kind of ARGs, these trends that a lot of kids follow, that are usually mocked by the media and looked down upon. And it has the kind of foresight and empathy to look into the fact that it's a bunch of very lonely kids trying to find connection, trying to find community in this harsh and increasingly isolating world. It's done in a way that's like, it's some of the creepiest visuals you'll ever see. I love the way this stuff is framed. I love the color palette of it. It has that kind of downgraded look to it, which, you know, it's very much amateur filmmaking, but also it's done in a way that's visually enticing. Some of the best editing I've seen all year, and really gets you into that mindset of how utterly, honestly terrifying the online atmosphere and online spaces have over our general psyches and the way that it's growing, especially for younger people who never knew anything besides the internet. It's such a, you know, recent-ish technology in the vast annals of history that we don't truly understand, and especially the effects it has on really young people. It's terrifying, ingeniously framed with this visual splendor and really understands teenagers and the relationship with the internet better than like some 4-year-old asshole who usually writes this kind of shit in a disparaging way. It's a fantastic horror film, socially conscious and confident in a way it can handle your emotions. Cronenberg is back, baby. Oh boy, is he back with something just like socially conscious and really fucked up. It's this very distinctive idea that has this kind of broad, metaphorical, political aspect you can apply to it, but it's just some of the craziest fucked up visuals, as you can see. You know, his fucking interest and understanding of body horror really on full display, and it's so good, man. It's so fucking good. Viggo Mortensen and Lea Seydoux, so great here. Probably the best duo, you know, on screen kind of pairing of the year. Ugh, God, I like this film. Love this film so much. So interesting. It's so good. The idea that like we kind of evolved beyond the need for pain receptors and we use it for art installations of like putting, you know, organs into people and out of people and stuff like that. It's such a clever idea. You can just get a lot out of it. It's also supremely horny in a way that most films nowadays just really aren't, and you kind of miss it when it's not there. It really adds personality to everything going on. It's just a visually bonkers and atmospherically pungent experience. I just haven't gotten it out of my head since I've seen it.
But you didn't say anything to me. You didn't do anything to me.
Well, that's what I was thinking, like.
I just don't like you no more.
You do like me.
I don't.
You liked me yesterday.
Martin McDonagh is a really prominent Irish filmmaker, and he was a playwright who wrote a lot in Ireland, you know, back before he blew up into film. He still writes plays, as far as I can tell. What's interesting about him is that like he's never actually made a movie. He's made a movie with Irish characters. Most famously, the two pairing that are in this film were previously in his movie in Bruges. But his films are never set in Ireland. And this also doubles as his first period piece as we take a look at the Irish Civil War and we explore these two people who used to be very close together, but there's a strange rift falling apart where two of them don't quite understand what's happening, whereas one of them wants to go back and the other one wants to. You can tell where the metaphor comes with the Civil War setting. Some of the best acting I've seen all year. Like, I don't think there's someone who stands out with the four leads. All of them do such a equally fantastic job. I'm hoping Kerry Condon gets more notice because of this film. She's great here. Barry Keoghan, just a rising star, so good, so entertaining, and obviously Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson are just two of our best exports. They are so fucking engaging and mesmerizing. Gleeson, in just the way he has such presence, and he really just hones in your attention whenever he's on screen. And Farrell, who does such weird fucking goblin shit all the time, and you know, it's funny because you see him in real life, he's such an affable dude, and like he picks the most dynamically interesting and strange roles. I just really enjoy watching him work. This film looks great. It really takes advantage of our beautiful Irish landscapes when you can get the weather to look at them and appreciate them, but it also kind of gets across that kind of vast emptiness of the space that is being shown here. It really gets across the isolation and the lack of purpose that the characters feel and evokes a lot of their actions. I don't know if this film is for everyone per se. I definitely don't think it's as accessible as something like In Bruges or even Three Billboards, but it has such a distinctive personality, and it's such a fascinating story where technically not a lot really happens, but you are compelled throughout it. It's such great filmmaking and just great storytelling with some fantastic performances.
Shit, you're Mikey. Yeah,
Yeah, man, it's me, man. It's me, Lonnie. I know you? Well, I mean, kinda. I mean, I live here, obviously, and, no, Lexi, man. Lexi used to babysit me all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my parents came home one night, y'all were humping in their bedroom. You jumped out the window, naked. They called the cops on you and everything.
So when this one came out, there was some comparisons between it and Licorice Pizza, because both of them deal with an older person in a rather questful relationship with a much younger person, and the G word was brought up a lot. As much as I enjoyed Licorice Pizza, this one captured my attention more because the dude who's the older one in the relationship is clearly just a predator, and he's just a grossly despicable person, and yet it's Simon Rex, who's just one of the best, you know, I'm saying a lot best acting, whatever, just the best lead performance. There's something so engaging about this guy. You get the sense that he used to have a lot of this charisma, and he still does, but it doesn't mean a lot as you get older, and that charm wears off where you can't use it to get your way anymore. And what happens once you get to that point, if you're an utter sociopath who doesn't give a shit about anyone besides yourself. Interesting enough, the Trump election is brought up a lot in this movie. Sean Baker has this very interesting visual palette where his movies have this very interesting pastel, it's almost Technicolor-esque aesthetic to it. They look extremely colourful and almost bubblegum poppy in a very kind of 90s sense, but it gets across as very grimy, decrepit, economically kind of ruined aspects of America that a lot of people tend to ignore. And I like that's where his head is at. It's people who are trying to make the best in this murky situation. In this case, it's just someone who's a terrible human being who is trying to do this. It's just a wonderful character study and just one of the most entertaining films I've seen all year.
It's like that movie. That movie.
Okay, what are you talking about?
Movie? Rakakuni.
What?
Rakakuni. You know the one with the chef? And he makes bad food. Pui. And then this raccoon sit on his head. Ooh, control him. And then he cooks good food.
Do you mean Ratatouille?
Ratatouille? I like that movie.
I say one of the most entertaining for Red Rocket because this might be the most entertaining film of the entire year. And also one that's the most emotionally rounded and makes me bawl like a baby every time I hit the end. Just a perfect movie in this moment of time with such a resonating message. It almost feels weird to talk about this because I'm not sure what I can say about it that hasn't been said over and over and over again by people. It just blew up in such a magnificent way. I felt very organic. People just heard how great this film is and went to go see it. The cast are stunning all throughout, but special props go to Stephanie Hsu and Ki Ho Kwan, who just fucking kick it completely out of the ballpark here. The latter of which has such a great story to this, and Hsu is very unappreciated in the kind of award ceremony at the moment, but how much her character has to go through and change and evolve with nearly every scene, and she just nails it every single time. You check out her audition tape, which is fantastic. It's just fantastically edited in a way that you can follow the story as it goes to various different times and periods and dimensions and realities and stuff, and yet you never feel disoriented with the way, it's a very complex thing to get across, yet it's a very accessible movie. I haven't seen a lot of people get really, in the same way Inception came out and everyone was really confused by that, or Tenet or something. I guess a lot of Nolan films, to be honest. But this one, you completely hit on what's happening and following it in a way that it feels like for a general audience that they will really get what this film is trying to do, and that's really great filmmaking. The triumph of this movie keeps getting proven as time and time goes on, and more people grow to appreciate it. It's been a while since I've related to a main character like this. Her life, it is obviously not very similar to mine for a lot of reasons, but the sense of loss and hopelessness when you reach a certain age, and especially when you're around your late 20s, early 30s, and you just don't know what to do. That hit hard, man. That I completely got that. Joachim Trier is a name I've come across before, and I've never really appreciated his work until this movie. He's got a great sense of direction in terms of the cinematography here, in terms of the direction here. It feels extremely picturesque, but also very alive and very lived in. It's got this strange murkiness to it, but it's so beautifully framed and composited. That sense of generational loss that I really relate to, and it just resonated with me so strongly as the film goes on. You really feel like you grow with the lead as she tries to struggle to figure out what meaning she can get from her life. This is a best list, and what is a best list but films that, you know, resonated with me personally.
What do you mean?
Well, like, sometimes at playtime, I look up to the sky, and if I can see the sun, then I think about the fact that we can both see the sun, so even though we're not actually in the same place and we're not actually together, we kind of are in a way, you know?
Speaking of films that I related to personally, and you can probably guess that if it's my number one choice, I don't think we ever stop trying to understand our parents, and that's regardless of our relationship to them, unless it's so toxic you don't even fucking register with them, or you never knew who they were. Even then, you do wonder. And what this film gets across is that sense of, especially when you're a child, you feel an unease and a tension that you can't quite put your finger on, and you really get this idea that this is a woman reflecting on this summer holiday she took with her dad that seemed on the outset to be, if a bit troubled, usually just fine and fun and frivolous. But as she began to think about it from a more mature perspective, there was something else happening. And that dreamlike feeling is really captured here. It feels like I've stepped into these memories. And it helps the fact that it's from a period I can kind of relate to. Those kind of tacky holiday resort getaways, which were big around this time. And you actually see people building them throughout the backdrop of the film. And, you know, those games that they had around and all this kind of stuff, the karaoke and the traditions and stuff. And the music especially makes you really feel like this film is transporting you with the leads, who both of them are excellent here. It's so rare that I say that a movie captures a feeling in a way I don't think I've ever seen before. I think definitely, like, the idea of reflecting on your life and trying to put the pieces together in a way that can make sense for you overall. It's just beautifully handled. It's so beautifully thought out, and it's from a first timer, which is incredible because, like, this is her first film, and this is what she's knocking out. I can't wait to see her grow as a filmmaker, as an artist. This film owns my heart in a way few others really do, and it's a great way to close out as we reel into yet another year. Peace.